What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Alan Wake 2, which I am just getting started after working on some other stuff I can't talk about just yet. And more importantly, I'm playing it ahead of the release of Control Resonant in September. I already played through Alan Wake 1 earlier this year, and I wanted to catch up with these after having already played Control before that game came out, which I've explained a few times. But it just so happens that I think Alan Wake 1 was a surprisingly great game. I can see why it was a bit of a cult classic. And after, I would say, the rave reviews Alan Wake 2 got, I was pretty interested in checking it out. That said, one of the reasons I have taken so long to do so is that it is only really available through the Epic Games launcher on PC, and this is a PC channel. Generally, I don't like using the Epic Games launcher, just to be real with you guys. I will say, in this particular case, I am willing to give Epic a little more slack than I normally would, and that is primarily because it was funded and published by them, as opposed to them trying to buy up exclusivity rights, which they did previously with a bunch of games. So in the case of this title, it's safe to say that the game wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Epic, so there is that, I suppose. Now, either way, Alan Wake 2 takes place 13 years after the original game did. And in all that time, Alan Wake, having been previously trapped in the Dark Place, has been plotting his escape, which he has done via his usual method of writing things into existence. It's pretty much immediately apparent that this has taken a bit of a turn. It seems that some of the writing was altered and things didn't go exactly according to plan anyway. But just like the first game, we can find a bunch of manuscript pages describing what has happened here. Unlike the first game, there are two separate campaigns here. So I knew a little bit about this. What I did not realize is that they sort of run concurrently, meaning like you do one and then you get to a point in the story where you jump to the next one and then so on and so forth. So I thought this was like two fully separate campaigns that you would play, but in that sense, I think it's a little more linear than I initially anticipated. Either way, however, we are playing as an FBI agent known as Saga Anderson, who specializes in this type of crime and is here to get to the bottom of some ritualistic murders that have been taking place that you quickly discover were the work of a cult. This cult, calling itself the Cult of the Deer, just so happens to be trying to ritualize people into the Taken, the dark enemies from the original game, and it is when their latest victim turns into a Taken that the story really starts to take off, as it were, as we suddenly are thrust into the supernatural, which I've gotta say everybody involved seems to take in really well-meaning strides. Nobody seems all that shocked by it, whereas even the first game seemed to do a little more build-up in that regard. This time around, it just seemed like everybody was immediately fine with this reality-bending new situation. And thus far, I've played up to the point where I'm about to switch to playing as Alan Wake for the first time, and so I figured I would stop and make this video, as it's still going to take me a couple days to get through this, even though it is a little short because I've got some other things going on. And I was pleasantly surprised to see a few things here, namely a little more specific progression. As you move through the game, you can pick up these manuscript fragments, which can be spent on upgrading the weapons you have acquired thus far, making them more useful to you. At least Saga here has charms as well that she can equip, which alter stats like max health, how easy it is to stagger enemies, that kind of thing. And that's on top of course, finding guns and the like, and the usual scavenging of ammo. That's not the only change, however. The levels immediately seem to be a little more open. You are kind of dropped into a larger explorable area, such as area outside Cauldron Lake or Bright Falls proper that you can now kind of run around in. Whereas the original game was a little more linear in this sense, which given its age is a little more understandable, I would say, but here there's a bit more running around to be done. And in particular, Saga Anderson, at least, from what I understand, Alan Wake plays a little differently, but Saga has this mind place, as she calls it, which is a variation of the Mind Palace, which she uses to organize all of her investigations and all the collectibles and just kind of doing all that stuff generally. Now, one thing I thought was interesting about that, though, is that a lot of the actual objectives progression are tied to you doing the investigative case board portion of this. Like some things just straight up won't spawn until you do the casework inside the mind place that is required of you, which could be a little clunky in places, and I'm curious to see as the game evolves how much I wind up enjoying that in particular. Otherwise, a lot of the game does remain the same, namely in the form of combat. We are going to be utilizing light to keep enemies at bay. I've also got to say it is much harder to dodge in this second game than it was the original. It really wasn't too difficult at all there, and one of my main struggles thus far has been trying to time the dodges properly this time around, as your main form of getting away from enemies once they've closed distance is in fact dodging away from them, ideally at the exact right time so you can stagger them a little bit. But in order to hurt them much at all, you're going to need to boost boost your flashlight at them to burn away the darkness that surrounds them before you can open them up to your normal gunfire. I also noticed that at least Saga here burns through batteries much more quickly than the original game as well, and they don't seem to recharge at all either. Like even to a baseline portion, which does, I would say, probably add a certain element of the survival side of things. And I'm just playing through normal for the first time. It looks like you do unlock Nightmare as you did previously in the first game as well, after you finish the story, I would assume. And I'm curious to see if there are any big changes there as well, but thus far it's been pretty smooth sailing in that regard. Now, outside of those more mechanical things, I've got to say I love the atmosphere. I love being able to walk around Bright Falls in particular, and I love the much more sinister and, I guess, serious, for lack of a better word, tone that a lot of these ritualistic murders have taken. So this is just immediately a bit darker than the original game, and I think some of that is down to just the graphical fidelity and what they are able to show. And really, I think the only slightly silly thing is that one of the characters just straight up is Sam Lake, even though he's technically Alex Casey, the FBI agent. But that's more just down to knowing who Sam Lake is, which, as I've explained many times, is one of the reasons I don't personally love to see real people as characters in video games. It just kind of takes me out of it a little bit. I think with this particular game, that might get meta, and I'll see how it pans out. That just feels like a plot point they may very well lean into at some point. I'm just noting how I've initially reacted to it, as this is a first impressions after all. Another thing I want to mention are the puzzles. There are a few of them. You have like stashes where you have to work out the code to various locks. There is these nursery rhyme things where you have to pick up the appropriate dolls, and you have to find the dolls first and then solve little nursery rhymes by putting the dolls in the correct places, and that unlocks the charms for your bracelet. And then there are your save points. So we have our lamppost system, if you will, from the original game, where some places are just shining bright with light and you can use them as cover to restore a little bit of health. But they are not your primary sort of save points. These are known as break rooms now, and are typically places like cabins and the like that are a little more generally structurally sound. And here you can go to actually properly save. It also seems like they're trying to lean a little more into survival horror more generally, even with things like the dodging and the way the flashlight works with a proper little bit of inventory management. So I've picked up a couple of upgrades already, so I assume it's probably not that big of a deal, but you do have limited inventory space as opposed to just like limited ammo capacity, that kind of thing now. And in some ways, even on normal, that does already make the experience feel a little more tense than the original game could ever really muster, just due to the nature of it. And I'm happy to see that, honestly, as I think it could use the challenge overall. But looking forward from here towards the actual review, I basically just have a few questions in mind, which is basically, of course, how well the story goes overall. I've heard glowing praise of that, so I'm not too worried about it. I am curious about how the changes in these mechanics feel over the course of the entire experience, but it's also not a terribly long game from what I understand. And then I was also delighted to see that they kind of roped in the Federal Bureau of Control, at least as a sort of side thing here. They have a brief mention of them in a conversation with somebody who works there, and I'm curious then how well all of this stuff connects, as it is meant to, of course. And obviously the differences between playing Saga as opposed to playing as Alan Wake. But at least from the outlook here, I think if they can make it feel a little more tense and survival horror at points, while also telling a great story, I will pretty much be good to go in that regard. But that's kind of where I'm at going into it. Keep in mind, I have not played this previously, as the video should have told you, so please don't spoil anything outright. But otherwise, I would love to know how you guys feel about this one down in the comment section below. If there's anything you want to mention, certainly feel free to do so. But for today, I do think that is pretty much where I'm at with it. I'm excited to dive into this one finally. I'm just kind of looking forward to a really good story that isn't quite so RPG-ish in nature as the last few reviews have been, but otherwise, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.